What's good everybody, I'm Keandre, this is Intellect, and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video we have yet another big board. A lot of the international players have really been showing out lately, and being that this class is so fluid, it was time to do another one. This is also sort of the easiest way to get a macro look at the draft. There's a lot more nuance in player roles and archetypes that you can't really show in a top 60 like this, but it gets the job done. I'll hopefully be putting some things out that kind of give a little bit more context in the future, but just stay tuned for that. And last thing before we go ahead and get it started, I'm looking to put together a collaborative mock draft series in the future, so definitely like this video, hit that subscribe button, and click the notification bell so you don't miss out. Let's go ahead and get it started. This list is a bit smaller than the one from last time, but I just wanted to give those players the respect and consideration as they really do deserve it. Starting us off, we have Florida's Scottie Lewis. Scottie Lewis's great athleticism and tremendous defensive ability might just get him drafted despite being underdeveloped and sporadic offensively. If he can add a few pounds and a consistent spot-up game, I think he's got potential as a rotational guard. I really don't think it's possible for anybody who actually loves basketball to not like Jason Preston and his story. He kept working through adversity and believed in himself and his game when nobody else did, and the fact that it's gotten him to NBA draft consideration is already a lifelong win. He declared without signing an agent, so we'll see what feedback he gets, but whether it's this year or next, that dynamic playmaker should be on an NBA roster. I barely even heard DJ Stewart's name in draft conversations for months. Even when he declared, it felt like that announcement just kinda came and went. He's a potential pick who had some great moments for one of the strangest Duke teams really ever. Check out his games against Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse for a look at some of the best of him. I remain a big fan of Isaiah Livers. I think he brings value as a 3-and-D guy at those forward spots, despite being older. There's an obvious case to be made for him to be higher than this. Rokas Jokubaitis is a part of what is a really solid international group of prospects. Zalgiris' 6'4" lefty guard has intriguing potential as a bench scorer and instant offense guy. At 6'5", 200 pounds, Providence's David Duke proved to be worth a second round look in this class. I loved how he was playing at the beginning of the season, but he hit a wall, especially as a shooter, and though it took him back down to earth as a prospect, it also diminished some of the things that he does well. He's a really good athlete with high potential defensively and an ability to set up his teammates. On to Louisville's David Johnson. It was really time for him to head to the NBA. I think he'll continue to make strides as a player and has a great chance to crack a rotation in the league. His combination of size, athleticism, vision, and shooting improvement could be enough to overlook the turnovers and injury concerns. Ariel Huck-Porty is among the best bigs in the class. It's a really interesting athletic lefty big man who has legit face-up and floor spacing potential. He's got a lot of energy and has shown himself to be surprisingly explosive at that size. A look back at tier 8, the first tier of this board. I'd probably add a few guys from the Missed the Cut section in here as well. It's tough to watch Neemias Queta and not at least get a little bit excited. He's listed at 7 foot with a 7'4" wingspan, but sometimes he looks 7'3" out there. He's a guy who's a really good athlete, can block shots, catch lobs, and has shown flashes in his skill development. Johnny Juzang's year reminded me of a supercharged version of Landry Shamet's sophomore season at Wichita State. He's a tremendous shooter off the dribble, shooting a whopping 47.2% on those. I love his potential as a movement shooter as well. I think March Madness sort of masked his weak areas and has even propelled him to some people's lottery, which I'm gonna be honest, is a bit wild. However, I do think he's a solid second round prospect at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in college. Quentin Grimes fits the bill as a 3-and-D wing. He didn't have the best ending to his season, however down the stretch he was a knockdown 50% 3-point shooter on nearly 10 attempts a game and a big part of one of the best defenses in college basketball. The added familiarity with NBA teams from his combine performance 2 years ago should only work in his favor. Moving on to Sandro Mamukelashvili, one of the more compelling players in the latter half of the draft. I think Team Fit is going to decide where he lands, but there's a lot to like with him as a player. He's a bit more clunky defensively, but he's got a good combination of size and skills at 6'11". Vrins Blanenberg is strikingly fluid as an athlete with great potential as a passer and shooter. He's been excellent as of late, and I think his attributes will intrigue more teams as we get closer to the draft, even with that slight frame. Even though Josh Primo was awfully inconsistent, he had his moments and showed signs of being a potential future first round pick. I felt like he was a 2022 guy, but he's declared and signed an NCAA agent, so he can return if he wishes. He's a high upside, super shifty and creative scorer from the perimeter, who I probably consider in the late 30s on down. We've talked about it before, but Charles Bassey is just a solid big prospect. Should we separate this board into positions or potential roles? Bassey is cemented among the leaders as a rim runner, shot blocker, and vertical spacer. It was a process for Herb Jones at Alabama. I remember he had a lot of buzz coming in with Colin Sexton and John Petty, but eventually he became a legit NBA prospect. Defense is where his greatest appeal lies. If I'm putting together a list of the best and most versatile defensive prospects, regardless of position, Herb has to be up at the top. Joel Ayayi is just good at basketball. Became a reliable shooter for most of the season. He's a solid defender and somebody who does all the little things that help you win. He rebounds, hustles, and is looking to make the right play. While he clearly doesn't have the ceiling of many others, I think he can contribute to winning in a big way. Julian Champagnie could very well return to school, but I'd gladly take him in this draft. He can score both inside and out at 6'8". It reminds me a little bit of Kyle Kuzma at Utah. It's great value for a guy like him in the second round of this class. If he stays and ends up late in the second, I think somebody will have gotten a steal. In a class full of talented passers, Daishen Nix can get easily overlooked, but I'm a fan of his game. It's unorthodox, he's big, physical, and don't get me wrong, he's going to have to be able to defend more consistently against NBA guards, and the shooting is a major swing factor. But the dude can play, and he's worth a legitimate look in the early second, though first round might still be a bit lofty for him. Isaiah Todd's shot-making ability at 6'10 gets everybody rightfully excited, but I would have liked to see more from him as a passer, a roll man, and just finishing around the rim. He's a tremendous talent, and some of the things he does as a shot maker at his height are truly remarkable, but if he's playing the 4 or the 5, defense is probably going to need to be his calling card first and foremost, and he left a bit to be desired there until late in the season. Marcus Bagley plans on transferring should he return to college. That whole situation at Arizona State just looked exhausting from every direction last year. Bags has clear potential even with the injury concerns. That combination of size, defensive potential, and shooting acumen always get teams excited. Here's a look back at Tier 6. There's a lot of good value of guys knocking on the door of the next tier. There's not really a huge barrier in between the two for a lot of them. Aaron Henry is just a rock solid player. He defends, he's a willing passer, and really took on a bigger offensive role well in a year without guys like Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman. The shot is still a work in progress, but he was great down the stretch and just someone I think a lot of teams would be excited to have. If you want an aggressive, athletic lefty wing in that Oubre mold, Terrence Shannon is your guy. He could potentially return to school for another year, but with Chris Beard's exit and his potential to be a late first or guaranteed early second round guy, I think he ends up staying. Kessler Edwards is a player who I think will help fill gaps and make a contribution to winning. Is he going to put up 20 a night and be statistically dominant in any one area? Likely not, but he's solid across the board and does the prerequisite things well as a modern four-man. JT Thor's decision to stay in the draft or return to Auburn is going to be one to watch. We just saw Ben Mathurin decide to head back to Arizona for another year to possibly be a lottery guy, and Thor could ultimately do the same. Or he stays here and a team in the early second or late first sees his potential and decides to grab him even as he's still a ways of really being counted on. With Shaka Smart leaving for Marquette and the Longhorns hiring former Texas Tech coach Chris Beard, Greg Brown also has quite a decision to make. He could go back for another season and be the focal point of what should be a super competitive team, or he stays in the draft and a second round team bites on his potential, especially as a perimeter guy, despite being less than stellar down the stretch. Jeremiah Robinson Earl just feels like an automatic eventual rotation player. He's got a sky-high IQ, has great awareness, and always makes the right play. I don't think he's necessarily got the ceiling as a scorer. He needs to improve a bit as an outside shooter, but at the end of the day, I don't think you can go wrong with picking him up. But maybe I'm biased towards the Kansas guys. I would assume was an early second round prospect to me. I think at his height and with that length, he can be an even more impactful defender in the league. There are moments where he was excellent, and others where he was disappointing, but you combine that upside with great improvements as a jump shooter and scorer, you have a guy that I think can easily be a rotational guard. One of the worst things about doing this type of stuff is having to try to defend a position on why you think a certain player, in this case Cam Thomas, who is extremely talented and deserves a ton of praise, just shouldn't be ranked as high. I just think he takes far too many shots in ill-advised situations, and a lot of the time he was the absolute weakest link on an already bad defense. He can score the ball among the best in the class, no question. He's got good size, and he's a good enough athlete to be a solid defender. So he deserves obvious first round consideration, but I don't know if I can go any higher than that. Trey Murphy is one of the most compelling 3-and-D prospects in this class. He's someone who can guard multiple positions and hold his own against quicker guards. He shot it about as well as anyone in the country, and on top of that, he's a fluid athlete and someone who can put it on the floor if need be. I can see him surprising people on draft day and becoming a much more significant pro than college player. BJ Boston remains the poster child for potential in this class. I'm a fan of his game and what he can become, and I think a team in the 20s will be too, despite the rough season at Kentucky and the obvious current shortcomings in his game. If he can go to an organization that's going to pour into that talent, it's hard for me to imagine he won't eventually have a role on an NBA team. If you've seen any of these videos, you know how I feel about Bones Hyland. Obviously the quickly comparison is there, but I actually think he's got a bit more upside than him as a scorer. He's super creative, confident, and in an NBA organization, maybe Bones can gain a pound or two and help himself reach his full potential. Bruce McBride is among the best defenders at that guard spot at just a listed 6'2". We saw him have great moments against everyone from the dynamic Baylor group to Cade and many others in the Big 12. Offensively, he's solid. You'd like to see more from him as a decision maker, but he already made vast improvements there from year one. I think several teams will be interested in what he can do throughout the second half of the first round. Day'Ron Sharpe is still one of the best bigs in the class. His size, strength, rebounding ability, along with an underrated mobility and playmaking acumen, make him a first rounder to me. I just think he had far too big of an impact in limited minutes of a handicapped team to not consider him in the first round. Every one of the players mentioned in this tier has first round potential. From the young guys like BJ, Greg Brown, Cam Thomas, and JT, to the Trey Murphys, JREs, and Kessler Edwards. I'm a big fan of this area in the draft in terms of value, both for the good teams and early second round bad teams in need of a second guy. If Chris Duarte was 3 years younger, he'd have a compelling case for the late lottery. Now you could probably say that about pretty much everybody, but it especially makes sense for him given that he's going to be 24 by the time he steps on an NBA court. Regardless, he's got a really complete game that I'd definitely take in the first round. Isaiah Jackson is another one of those intriguing but inconsistent young players. He's an unbelievable athlete at his size and has sky-high potential defensively. However, he's still got quite a bit to work on. He's got great potential to go top 20, but the rest of his game needs to catch up to him as an athlete. Alperen Sengun is an impressive offensive talent. He's been dominant in the Turkish league, putting up 20 and 10 with a few assists and steals as well. In the year of the Jokic MVP and Sabonis All-Star nod, Sengun could reap the benefits. The range for Corey Kispert in terms of draft stock is quite large. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up with some of the most workouts in this entire class. He's a tremendous shooter with good size and a solid defender against many at his position. I think there might end up being too many guys with higher upside to take a 23-year-old shooter in the lottery, but the comfortability is there, and we've seen much stranger things happen. There's not much to dislike in Jared Butler's game. He's been a great shooter for a while now. He can get his own shot in a variety of situations and play solid defense. To me, he's a really safe bet to be a contributor in the league for a long time. Every year it feels like we have a prospect or two like Josh Christopher. Super talented high school prospects who left a bit more to be desired, whether it's due to injuries, school fit, or just overall performance. Guys like Jaden McDaniels, Kevin Porter Jr., even a Malik Beasley or DeJounte Murray were all a bit undervalued in their draft classes and have ended up becoming great contributors. Given his skill set and physical attributes and potential as a shooter, though he's not there yet, I expect Christopher to do the same should he fall to the late first or even further. Really, all the international guys feel like a bit more of a slow grind in terms of coverage than in years past. Even guys like Killian Hayes and Denny Avdia were pretty popular right before the season stopped last year. Rocco's potential to do it all at both forward spots is quite impressive. James Bouknight is one of the better scorers in this class. While I think there are obvious concerns about his abilities without the ball, as a passer, and his consistency defensively, I do like what he brings at that 2-guard spot. Davion Mitchell catapulted himself into top 20 conversation with his play down the stretch of the season. He's one of, if not the best guard defender. I like him as a scorer off the bounce, and he's an underrated playmaker. While he's an older prospect turning 23 in the fall, I like what he brings despite being undersized. I can't quite get on board for the lottery, but he's just a really good player. Sharife Cooper is one of the best playmakers in this class. Even without a reliable or standout area as a scorer, he was able to serve as the engine for a super athletic Auburn team, diming up his teammates with pinpoint lobs, pocket passes, and everything in between. His NBA future is going to rely heavily upon what he can be as a shooter and as a scorer. If he can make the proper improvements there, he's a potential star. If not, it's going to be tough to play him big minutes as a possibly sub 6-foot guard. Jalen Johnson is one of those players who is super tough to rank and gauge. He's certainly talented, but there's a lot riding on his ability to shoot and score to be productive, and he's a solid defender, but not good enough that you're super excited about putting him out there regardless of what he's doing offensively. He might be the toughest player for me to rank, and I could see him going anywhere from 6 to about 16 on draft night. While I'm not as high on Franz Wagner as I was at one point in the middle of the season, I still think he's got potential to be a really productive player. He is one of the better defenders at his position, with upside as a shooter and obvious talent as a passer. The handle might not be there, he relies a lot on going right and lacks a bit of strength, but I think he's firmly a part of the large fringe lottery group. This tier was quite large, but for a good reason. I think these players are just a slight step behind the next group for numerous individual reasons, but I also think many of them have cases to get into the top 20. Josh Giddey has been on a tear lately. He's putting up triple doubles like it's nothing and putting on a passing exhibition that we don't usually get from 18-year-olds. While he's a finished product by no means and is going to need to do a lot to improve defensively and as a scorer, he's dynamic and has been getting more comfortable as the games go on. Team fit is going to matter, but he's got a great chance of sneaking in the lottery and becoming the first Australian since Ben Simmons to do so. He's definitely got a much longer road to improve offensively than he's often advertised, but Jaden Springer can absolutely become a high-level player in a Malcolm Brogdon-ish type of role. I love what he brings defensively. He's physically imposing, and in the right situation that focuses on his development, I think you've got a potential high-impact player. Kai Jones has a ton of potential that I think a team anywhere from 10 to 15 is going to fall in love with. His progression from year 1 to year 2 at Texas was commendable, and while he's far from a finished product, I think it's unfair to give him the boom or bust label. He does have a really high ceiling, but the floor being a big who can defend on the perimeter, serve as a lob threat, and possibly space the floor is super valuable in today's game, regardless of the caliber or how long it takes him to develop. There's a case to be made for Tre Mann being the best shot creator in the class. I'm not saying I necessarily go there, but he's at least close. He's got to improve as a passer, and it'll be a process for him defensively in the league, but his offensive potential is sky high. He has some of the best pace, and he's as shifty as it gets with his ridiculous shin angles. He's a crafty finisher as well. Usman Garuba has been making serious strides lately. He's always been an elite defensive prospect at the 4 or the 5, but in the biggest moments of the season, he's been a much better shooter and just offensive player in general. He's looking more comfortable with the ball, still making solid reads as a playmaker, and ultimately I just think it'll be tough to pass up a 19-year-old doing these type of things in the world's second best league. Whoever picks Scotty Barnes better have the people in place to develop him, and hopefully the personnel to get him a spot where his strengths are used. We've said it many times at this point, but if he can't find a place to score in the half court, the easiest likely being spot up threes, it's going to be harder for him to get minutes despite his obvious abilities as a defender and potential as a passer. Zaire Williams is still very much a gamble, but his upside on both ends at 6'8" make him an easy lottery talent to me. This season was weird, but especially for Stanford. They had to stay in hotels for a good portion of the season, and didn't even play at home until late due to the pandemic. Zaire had his share of injuries and personal issues that kept him from getting a rhythm late, but the part of the season that he did have consistency, he looked the part of an elite shot creator, solid passer, and an impactful defender. Keon Johnson could very well be the most athletic player in the class. His ability to explode in traffic and move all across the court is rivaled by very few. He's raw in most other areas, but that elite defense, athleticism, and upside as a passer and somewhat as a scorer will likely land him in the lottery. Jonathan Kuminga definitely has his shortcomings, but the same can be said about a lot of the guys that have ranked right behind and around him. If I felt that there was a more complete prospect with all the clear attributes and upside as Kuminga, I'd rank them ahead of him. But at this point, I just don't quite see it. While I don't think he's that guaranteed top 5 guy, the good moments he showed at 18 years old in the G League can't be anything other than encouraging. At number 5, and the last guy this section, we have Moses Moody. Some will point to his lack of explosiveness and athleticism as reasons why he should be ranked lower, but I just don't think that's ultimately going to hinder him from becoming a really good player in the league. At 18, and one of the youngest players in the class, I think he'll definitely improve as an athlete in an NBA organization, but his baseline of high-level 3-and-D play with added potential as a scorer have him at the 5 spot for me. The top 4 is locked in and has been for a while. This is really the only thing I think I can count on being super consistent until July 29th. Starting with Jalen Suggs. He's weirdly become a bit polarizing as a player from what I've seen lately. I saw everything from Jalen Suggs as by far the best player in this class, to he shouldn't even go in the top 10, both of which I think are untrue, especially in this draft. Does he create a ton of shots off the dribble and get to the basket at will? No. Is the handle and lack of hip mobility concerning? For sure. But it'd be unfair to completely limit his game at 19, especially considering the moments he had against Iowa and BYU, among a few others. He's just a clear number 4 guy to me. I'm a huge fan of Jalen Green's game. I think he's got a great chance of becoming a top tier scoring guard and an electric athlete and entertainer on top of that. In a tweet that he later deleted, he said that he felt like if he had played for Auburn or whoever else in the NCAA, it'd be a different story about who's going number 1. While I personally disagree and don't think he should really care, I wouldn't expect him to feel any other way, and I like the confidence and potential edge he has growing. He's definitely ahead of Suggs for me, but a good amount behind Evan Mobley. Now to this top 2 in tier 1, though I do think there is a little bit of a gap there, Evan Mobley is a special talent. There aren't many bigs who have his combination of skills and physical gifts. Unless the team already has a really good and prospective option at the 5, and would opt to get a creator with less overall upside, it's hard for me to imagine Mobley not going number 2. And Cade Cunningham remains at the top. It should be interesting to see who gets the number 1 pick in the draft, because there are a lot of different ways Cade could be used as a player. I think the Timberwolves will be an interesting mix. While Anthony Edwards definitely needs the ball, both D'Lo and Cat are really good off ball, and that's an awful lot of young talent. I can see him being the guy that sort of puts all those pieces together. Teaming up with KPJ and Christian Wood in Houston will be fun, as would Detroit with a newfound identity and young pieces. Orlando, Cleveland, OKC, and Toronto are awfully fun for him as well. Now here's a recap of the entire big board. I appreciate y'all for watching the video. Definitely leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new. I just released the first episode of my new podcast. We had a great conversation with Pierre from House of Highlights and Through the Wire, and you should definitely go check that out if you haven't yet. We'll definitely be having many more guests from the basketball community on the pod, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, I'm Keandre, this is Hoop Intellect, and I'm out.